Feelings of isolation and loneliness have been rampant in this country, particularly last year when the response to the coronavirus pandemic was at its height. However, all this social distancing sparked the biggest increase in online dating in years. People simply want a connection. Joining us with more on the psychological trends in COVID dating is Dr. Nancy Lee, clinical psychologist. She is also the author of Don't Sleep With Him Yet. Well, first of all, Dr. Lee, it's so great to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you, Leela.
Well, I love the title of your book, and I want to kind of dive into that because I'm curious by the title. It sounds like you are wanting to make that connection, but needing to resist every urge to jump into bed with somebody the moment you meet them.
Absolutely. So chemistry is so powerful. But that said, that eroticism and that desire to sleep with somebody can really drive people to get to know one another better and make things even stronger, more intense, and gratifying when the sex actually does happen.
That's interesting. You know, a lot of people say there's a 3-date rule that exists. I think it's probably based on your own level of comfort, but what would you say would be a good length of time, an average length of time that two people should get to know each other before they begin intimacy?
It's a question that I'm asked so often, and there's no one-size-fits-all answer. What I tell people is go with the rule of your heart and your head. And by the way, I really knocked down that 3-month rule in my book. I give a lot of explanations for it. That rule was definitely set by a guy.
Right, because you could have 3 consecutive dates, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
Exactly. And then some people talk about the 3-month rule. That's for returning things in a store. That's not for sleeping with somebody. So it really just throw out the rules, go with your heart and your head. That said, there's so much psychology related to dating and mating and attraction. Read my book. Knowledge is power.
It certainly is. Let's talk about dating in the COVID era, shall we? Do you find that people are more or less reluctant to engage in these casual sexual hookups?
Great question. So psychology predicts that people are going to be far more reluctant to engage in casual sexual hookups now and even moving forward. Remember that the pandemic posed a situation where even just kissing a stranger could literally kill you.
Right.
Danger is embedded very powerfully in our brains. And even when a danger is removed, that memory lingers behind, and that memory is going to, that lingering memory of danger is going to impact people to at least be more vigilant about whom they choose to hook up with.
Right. And if we're talking about last year and how dating apps there was a resurgence of interest in getting onto a dating app. Well, I've heard a lot of people who did find somebody online, but it was a while before they could actually connect in person. But instead what they did is they would write each other letters and do some of those more romantic, thoughtful things that seem to be passé or outdated. Do you think that people are going back to their traditional roots when it comes to relationships?
Absolutely. Love texts, as we say. Talking to one another for hours. One thing I love to tell couples is focus on the verbal intercourse, especially getting to know somebody just as much, if not more, than the physical intercourse. And COVID really brought that about because people were afraid to have physical intimacy with one another. So they talked to one another for hours. And just like you say, they wrote letters or they texted, and it was extremely gratifying. And it also helped them really get to know one another well.
Absolutely. Well, this is a great place to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about COVID dating, how to do it better, things that we should be looking out for. Let's do that in 2 minutes. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We've been chatting with Dr. Nancy Lee, and we've been discussing COVID dating and how things have changed. And it sounds like, Dr. Lee, things have changed almost for the better in some ways, because people are becoming a little bit more thoughtful, taking things a little more slowly when it comes to getting sexually active with someone.
Absolutely. That is one silver lining of the pandemic, if you will.
And do you find that anybody has developed negative habits when it comes to pandemic dating, let's call it?
Avoidance in psychology is very detrimental. And unfortunately, with the pandemic, many people's avoidance tendencies became even more pronounced, okay? So psychology emphasizes being proactive, taking action, going for what you want. And unfortunately, to answer your question, the pandemic fed into to many people's avoidance as well.
So it's almost, while we all had to physically isolate, there's a level of emotional isolation.
Oh, yes. But turning that around, loneliness is a driving force that really motivates people to get out there and date. Even before the pandemic, more than 3 in 5 Americans reported feeling lonely. What I find fascinating, it's not people's actual isolation that causes that loneliness, but it's something psychologists call perceived social isolation that drives loneliness. So it's not just singles, Layla, but even many people in relationships can also feel really lonely. And the pandemic absolutely exacerbated that.
Right. So the takeaways from this whole experience, people should still try to connect, because even though dating can feel like a chore, as you say, it can be fun, but it's kind of a chore. And if your end goal is to find a permanent mate, like they say, you have to kiss a lot of frogs to find the one. But it actually turned out that there were more marriage certificates filed in 2020 than there had been the previous year.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons why is that in times of extreme personal stress and turmoil, we really tend to turn to relationships that make us feel extremely safe and secure. And insofar as dating goes, what's more secure than an engagement? Right. That's also the reason that you really see marriage rates climb after natural disasters like hurricanes and earthquakes. Remember, I'm in Southern California. I've got to throw in earthquakes in there.
Yes.
But absolutely, yes. So engagements continuing to climb. We lean into those kinds of relationships that make us feel comforted and safe.
That's interesting. So for anybody who's out there watching this and they may be single, maybe dating lightly, what would your advice be for those who just are kind of tired of being on the market, that want to find the one, but just don't know how to do it in the right way?
First of all, so many people I work with in my practice, they tend to not necessarily attract, but go for the same partner. So for people that are having problems, or really for anybody, I want to throw an acronym out there. It's called STRIKE. So these you can remember it by the acronym STRIKE. So think about having these characteristics in a partner. S for stability, T for trustworthiness, R for reliability, I for integrity, K for kindness, and E for empathy. So if you kind of look, of course, chemistry is so important too, but many people tend to overlook those STRIKE characteristics that are really so important in terms of really connecting and having a great relationship.
I think
And also just get out there again, choose action over avoidance. You have so much more to gain than to lose by taking action.
Absolutely.
Anybody listening, reach out to that crush, whereas before the pandemic you may have felt too reluctant to contact them.
Don't be shy.
Let people, in addition,
What's the worst they could say is no, right?
Exactly. You'll
Dr.
find
Lee,
that's not going to devastate you.
Right. Well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much, Dr. Lee. It's been a pleasure to chat with you. Don't sleep with them yet. That's the title of her book. We'll be right back.